I'm shocked.
But I know it's almost like the AHL has no money, and the NHL doesn't really give a shit at the end of the day. Let me. I hit the wrong button. Hold on.
I am holding on for dear
Yeah.
life.
That Marvel Remix game is great.
I'm glad to hear.
Yeah, I mean
Um,
it's the same game except they have a second deck you pull out of, but it's not as
oh, so
bad
that's
as Star Trek.
okay. I was gonna say that's what Star Trek
No.
does as well, and I didn't think the second deck was particularly cool.
No, all the second deck does here, it's a villain deck, and you
Mm,
basically you have to in your to get any points at the end,
mhm,
you have to have at least one ally and one villain, which is really easy to do. The only reason that they separated the deck at all is just because it guarantees that you will have a villain.
mm.
But it doesn't mean you're going to like your villain. So you can sort of strategically. Password's not valid. Hold on a second. Hold on, let me. Weird. So you can strategically get to a point where you're like, all right, I have the rest of my combo set up. Now I just need to figure out the right villain, or the other way around, because the villains are pretty all over the map
Mm.
in terms of how they affect your deck. So that's about it. It's not. I was reading about the Star Trek one, and everyone's like, no. And then people who have that one, who played this one, are like, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel bad because so Fantasy Realms was a huge hit in my Saturday night group, and the other part of our group is a family, and they bought. I kind of encouraged them to be like, well, we like this one, and there's a Star Trek one, and you guys like Star Trek, so you should buy the Star Trek one,
Yeah.
and it's not good. Um,
I mean, my boys and I are just like not super into the fantasy theme, which is why we
yeah. Well, I mean, it is. By
we
the way, it is like the most
yeah.
generic fantasy theme shit ever. Like,
No, I know. Yeah, I looked at it.
so it's not even.
In fact, actually, someone was telling me, well, you got kids and there's like, big boob shit, and I was like, well, I don't really want that. And
Mm,
but then I was looking at the cards afterwards, and I was like, oh, it's fucking not that bad. I
yeah,
thought you were
no.
talking like anime level.
There's worse out there in terms of mass
Oh
market
yeah,
card games and big fucking tits and shit.
yeah.
I don't think it's that bad. And funnily enough, we played 3 games of it last night. Forgotten
Oh yeah, because when the
Fantasy Realms.
expansion's out now, yeah.
No, it's deluxe edition just came out.
Oh,
Uh,
that's what it is.
but I already own the expansion and the main game, so I'm actually
Ah,
kind of
that's so funny.
mad that they put out a deluxe edition when I've literally everybody sort of in our group got into this game like 3 months ago.
Yeah,
And if we'd known a deluxe edition was coming, I might have just not gotten it
yeah.
then.
I mean, the only two downsides of the Marvel one, and they're minor. One is there's a lot of cards. There's like 70 something cards, but because of the theme, when you like, it's very easy to feel like you've seen them multiple times. I mean, it doesn't
Yeah.
affect the game because obviously it's combos, but like it's just that recognition happens probably a lot faster.
Hmm.
And then the card art is beautiful, but it's overload. So it takes you a second to like process what you're looking at.
That was part of the
Um,
problem with the Star Trek one too. Is
yeah,
the cards were
just
sort
overdone.
of overloaded with just it wasn't clean design, and there's just like words everywhere, and it's like, what am I
Yeah.
comboing here? Whereas Fantasy Realms, it's very clean.
Yeah, there's also a couple of vagaries with, I mean, there always is those kind of games, but just in terms of like how certain descriptors affect things, like it's a
Hmm.
little more complicated than it needs to be in certain areas. There's like one or two where I have to read it like 3 times, and I'm like, all right, I think it's, and I'm having playing Marvel Champions right now. I'm very much used to craziness like
Yeah.
that, but like I'm still reading it, and I'm like, are you saying that this is blanked or it's not blanked? Like what, like. Do I get
Yeah.
both of these or do I not get both of these?
Yeah.
Could you just have put that better?
Do they have
Um,
a scoring app for that?
Not yet.
So the
That's
best
fine,
thing
whatever.
about base Fantasy Realms is they made an open source scoring app, and it's
Yeah.
fucking incredible.
Yeah, I read about that. Yeah, supposedly
Um,
there's one coming, but even still, like just from the standpoint of like when you're making your combos, understanding what you're affecting,
yes.
there's like 4 or 5 cards that we've come across where I'm still like the game's pretty new,
Yep.
So like I hopped on like Reddit or wherever immediately and was like, does anyone have a ruling on this? Like anywhere? And there wasn't one, but
You should always check Board Game Geek, by the way.
I did, yeah.
Oh yeah. You said
Oh, I did.
Reddit. Reddit
I looked around.
sucks. Board Game Geek is better. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway,
No, you know what though? Like the Marvel Champions Reddit's really good.
I'm sure.
Like really, really good. It's just all depends on stuff. And the Board Game Geek version of that is fine, but it's not the same conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just that oftentimes the developers are actually on Board Game Geek.
Oh, see, that's how the Reddit is for this
Gotcha.
or for Champions. Like the Fantasy Flight dudes are all over it. So anyway, neither here nor there. You ready to do this thing?
Yeah, I suppose.
Did we we didn't pod in time for Chicago, right? So Chicago's part of this week.
What time? When was the Chicago game?
It was Sunday, but I don't know.
I'd imagine if it was a Sunday game, then we didn't talk about it because.
Yeah, I would think so too. Okay.
Hold on, let me verify because I felt like we did talk about how embarrassing that game was, but.
I know, but they're all embarrassing, so it's just kind of hard to tell.
It was a Saturday game, so we definitely talked about Chicago.
Oh, it was. Oh, fuck that, and
yeah,
get out of there, Chicago.
So this week is Islanders, Rangers.
It's the Yorks.
Devils.
It's the Yorks.
Yes.
It's the Yorks week. Week of
Yorkies.
Yeah, the Yorkies. Okay.
Okay. Let me start the recording.
You got it.
Okay, we're going.
Hold on.
Me. Yeah, let me get a sip of
sweet nectar.
And then knock shit all over the place.
Yeah. You ready?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Hello and welcome to Circling the Cup, San Jose Sharks podcast, episode number 189. We're going to hop into it. You might notice that I sound a little sick. Don't worry, it's not the Sharks making me sick. Although I will say the Sharks are not good for your health right now. In fact, you've probably read many articles, and if you watch the post-game interviews, heard many a times that the Sharks play might not be good for the Sharks' mental health. So, you know, a word of caution on this. Here with me, as always, is the Honorable Ben. What's up, Ben?
Dishonor for Connor.
Exactly. And not with us because he was actually too sick to be on the podcast, is Colin, who will hopefully be back next week. But speaking of things that make you sick, Ben, well, I think I already said the Sharks. I'm going to say that again because this is another week of Sharks hockey that, well, isn't great. And the one thing that I kind of want to identify is how disappointed I am in the entertainment value. Now, I know that we didn't think the Sharks were going to be good, Ben.
Yeah.
But most of what I was looking forward to this season, and I've told other people as well, look, this season was never going to be a good season. This is, you know, we are right now in what is going to be a very probably long and slow transition to whatever the next iteration of the Sharks are. So my expectations for the season were not high. They certainly weren't this low. But what I was looking forward to, at the very least, was watching amazing plays from the kids, like the trick pass that Bordeleau tried yesterday in the Henderson Knights Barracuda game. And the disappointing thing is, I don't even get that. They're not even giving me that. It's like they don't want me to have any joy, Ben. Right? It's so weird. They're calling me 50 times a day, every day, to buy tickets. And I am going to the game next week against Tampa Bay Lightning, which I'm looking forward to. I'm bringing my boys, and you know, maybe we'll be able to meet Drew or whoever else that might be floating around there. But you know, the thing that sucks right now is that I'm not really sure what to root for or what to watch here because you know, there are players on the team that I still enjoy, obviously, but the Sharks play is just, it's really bad. And look, they won a game this week, and we'll talk about that. But I'm not convinced that they necessarily should have. And that's the thing, is without having those kids up, I get the different strategies that people are sort of surmising the Sharks are using, right? There's one, which is they don't think the kids are good enough, and you should hate Quinn because he hates young kids. I don't necessarily know that I buy that one. Two is, well, they're keeping them down there until they're absolutely ready to pop up and they need to dominate. That's what the team is saying. I also don't know that I fully believe that. And then there's the third one, which is the sort of theory that, well, they're raising them all together as a unit, and then they're going to flip them all up at the same time, and then they'll be good. And I also don't believe that, because quite frankly, the contract situation with the Sharks doesn't actually allow that to happen on a level that's more than maybe like two guys at a time. So the idea that all of a sudden you're going to snap your fingers and you're going to have a whole line or two come up is kind of bullshit. But I would have at least liked to have seen the electricity, that guys like Eklund and Bordeleau specifically bring. And I know that you're probably going to bring up Merkley, and I understand that, Ben. I would like to see the erratic gamble that kid takes on a night-to-night basis more than what I'm seeing now. Because what I'm seeing now is a forward core who can't really score, and a defense who doesn't really want to play defense. Now, I will say this. I am seeing pretty good goaltending. Unfortunately, just with the shot numbers against these guys and the defensive situation, there's only so much they can do. But, Reimer has looked good. Kakinen, I think, has looked fine.
Honestly, really quick,
the
only reason the Sharks had a chance to tie, which they didn't do last night's game, was entirely on Big Kak's play.
Yeah,
right? He was outstanding yesterday.
I know, and how frustrating for Reimer. I know one of our listeners said, well, he knew what he signed up for, and true, but this is a guy. I'm going to talk about Reimer first, obviously, but Reimer is a guy who obviously he deserves a starting job somewhere. I mean, he has it here, but you're kind of the perennial backup for forever. Then you come over and you finally get a chance to shine and you play real good, but it's on a really shit team. And then Kakinen too. Yeah, I'm like, and the great thing about that is, not only am I encouraged about our NHL goaltending, but I'm encouraged by the AHL goaltending right now. So it seems like the Sharks have gotten like that part solved. But again, goaltenders, they are your last line of defense, obviously, but they can only do so much. And the Sharks defense has been absent. The other thing I want to point out, which is pretty funny, to me at least, is the Sharks have had a pretty decent fourth line. And, if you listen to the broadcast and you read around the web, everyone will talk about, hey, the Sharks fourth line's pretty good. At least the fourth line's pretty good. I want to point something out. If you're rolling basically 3 fourth lines, you're upping the odds that one of those will be good. And that's what I feel like the Sharks are kind of doing right now is they've got, we know we collected all these fourth line players, and so they have a functional fourth line. And granted, they haven't really had a great fourth line in the past. I would prefer to have 3 good lines and then a mediocre fourth line over a good fourth line.
The reality is, like, calling it the fourth line is disingenuous.
Right.
Because you've constructed, second, third, and fourth lines that are essentially equal on a talent basis, or you've got a third line that kind of actually sucks, right? So it's not the fourth line.
Yeah.
So it's just propaganda to call it the fourth line, basically. But it gives Hetty and Baldy something to talk about, emphasizing, oh, look at the grit players. So.
I don't want to pick on the announcers too much because for the most part, I enjoy the announcers. I like having Drew back a lot because I feel like he, at least compared to some of the other folks that we have had, he's always been a little bit more obvious. He will get upset occasionally. But the one thing I'm going to pick on Hetty for 1 second, because 2 or 3 times I caught him saying we. And I understand that they more or less work for the organization, but he was apologizing. I'll add this. He said, sorry guys, but, and then he made a not even a disparaging comment, just, a proper feedback on a player. And I was like, dude, you gotta get out of that mindset because you're not on the team, and the fans deserve to understand when players aren't playing well. And we're not idiots too. I mean, I don't think he thinks we are, but it's like, we know that Sharks are not good. When we see someone making a dumb mistake, we're smart enough to realize it's a mistake. There shouldn't be an apology from your announcing team for talking about that. In fact, actually, I would prefer they double down and provide insight into what they can do better. And he did follow up with that, in all fairness. But it was just there too many people making excuses. The thing that I like, Ben, is I and again I know you don't pay attention to the coach interviews and all that stuff, but man, I whether or not Quinn's coaching has done anything for me lately, which it hasn't. Um, I do enjoy his press conferences because that guy is very candid about what the Sharks are not doing well, and he doesn't sugarcoat it. And I always appreciate that. In fact, I found him actually very funny and charming when he does it. But more importantly, the question here is, what can this team do to turn things around at least a little? Because what concerns me, Ben, and this is the one area where I am now protective of the kids coming up, is mentally there's something wrong here because you can see the frustration permeating through everything in the organization from the coaches. The players are obviously extremely frustrated. Again, if you listen to the post-game interviews, you hear it, right? Sturm even called them out. It just doesn't seem like a great environment for anyone. So, they won a game this week. And I had the hope that they just had to get off the schneid, right? Win a game, and then not necessarily expect them to suddenly take the league by storm. Same player group, obviously, but to at least shake off some of whatever was weighing them down. And it didn't really work out that way. I don't know. This week for you, Ben, what has this week been about?
For
A
my
long sigh.
well, for me, okay, so for me as a fan and you know a amateur analyst of hockey, I think we could say,
Sure.
like, what I'm looking for is what adjustments does Quinn make with player personnel, and
Yeah.
what adjustments are the players making? What is Quinn trying to get them to do, right? And certainly, I think the frustration of the first couple of weeks of the season is it's not really clear that the guys were getting it, whatever Quinn was asking them to do, right?
Yeah. Right.
And I would say that didn't necessarily, clear up in the first game of this week either, right?
Right.
So then we get to the Rangers game, and the Sharks played an actual competent third period. And suddenly it looked like, okay, maybe things are starting to sink in because the forwards seemed a little bit more responsible in the defensive zone, and there was far less miscommunication on the defensive side of things compared to prior weeks, etc.
Right.
So I was kind of like, okay, all right. I don't like this mix of players, and I don't think this mix of players is particularly good, and it's certainly not entertaining because it's very
It's
defensive
not.
focused hockey and not a lot of offense until and unless Timo gets a little bit luckier than he's been.
Like, and again, just to add to that, it's trying to be defensive hockey,
Hmm. Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's not. But it's
Well,
not accomplishing it very
there's
well.
there yeah there's two ways to evaluate that, right? The
Right.
results, which have been bad, and
Yeah.
has been a mix of just mostly mistakes, honestly, right? Like we had the game, last game Big Cac played before this one, where he was left trying to fend off 2-on-1s over and over again, and
Right.
proved less capable than Reimer at it, right?
Right.
Um, and then there's the, like, watching the players actually do what they're assigned to do. Like, what are the forwards doing in the defensive zone? Where what are they doing also at the blue line? When play is transitioning, that sort of stuff. What are they doing in the neutral zone? Anyway,
Yeah.
like, because there's a difference between, like, what Quinn is asking for and what the players have been doing,
Right.
just to some extent, right?
Right.
Um, but he's clearly, from the selection of the players that he's chosen to bring into this year, and the rotation he's got of, we will never see Noah Gregor again alive, apparently, and for some reason Harrington and Magna are interchangeable. I mean, they basically are interchangeable, but they're not good at hockey. Though I will
Right.
say I praised Magna quite a lot in the games he's played over the last week or so, just in terms of being competent, which is a thing that is kind of new for him. That's great. Anyway,
Yeah.
um, so So yeah, they're very defensively focused. I think that's what David Quinn wants, and I can't really explain what happened in the third period of the Ranger game because all of a sudden
I can.
the Sharks were buzzing. I mean, I know that part of it is that the Rangers just fell apart.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, and it's not to discredit the Sharks for playing well, but the weird thing about that game is that the first and the second. I mean, okay, so first period, the Sharks do the thing that they seem to do, which is play a semi-competent first period,
yep,
score
yep,
first, right? I
yep.
mean that they've got right. The first period doesn't seem to be the major issue with most of their games. The second period, though, I mean, if you look at the amount of shots they got on net in that first period, wasn't great. And if you look at it the second, they were wildly outshot. And then all of a sudden, it was like what 16-2 the other way, like just
Across the third
like
period and the OT, yes.
like at the drop of a hat, like I it's easy for you to look at that as like, oh, the Sharks found another gear, but I don't. That's too sharp. That's too. The Sharks may have had another gear, but I think the Rangers got a flat tire at the same time.
Yeah,
You know.
I don't disagree. But it also, it could have been, things finally starting to click in the way that Quinn wants to structure,
Sure.
the defensive side to the transition. Also,
Yeah.
also, let's be honest, it was also largely Erik Karlsson just deciding to have a game. Like
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
just a brilliant overall performance, and also a lot of luck because he keeps trying to do that, and oftentimes he's let down by his fellow players who can't catch a pass or can't competently get the puck out of the zone, so he's caught out of position and all of that stuff. So the third period was essentially like
The
Carlson
Carlson's
did
show. Yeah.
everything he typically does, and he wasn't let down by his teammates, right?
Yeah.
That's another way to possibly look at it.
And I brought this up last podcast too, by the way. Just, I mean, have you noticed, like, again, pass receiving
Mhm.
is just not good.
No, well, because you've got a bunch of unskilled players. They're all fourth
Yeah.
liners. Why are players typically fourth liners? Because they
Right.
can't pass, catch a pass, or shoot, right? Like,
Yeah.
and the Sharks have assembled an entire, legion of fourth line players. Cunnin, there's only one place he's any good, and that's sitting at the side of the goal mouth.
Yeah. Right.
Right, like he can't catch a pass, he can't pass. There's a reason why he was freely available, and it's that is what it is. So I'm with you. So to kind of back up all of my, all of that speaking, like I came into this season initially before it became clear that the young guys were going to get fucked. The only thing that was going to bring me to this Sharks season with any enthusiasm was to watch Bordelot and Eklund and Merkley get an opportunity to play and learn and make mistakes, etc. If the team had the balls to do it, right?
Yeah. Right.
And they didn't. So there is not much to watch with this group.
Yeah. Well, and people are gonna probably come back and say, "Well, hey, you can watch it. You can watch Dakuda." And look, I get that. First of all, the AHL streaming app sucks. It was terrible last night against the Henderson Knights. It was almost unwatchable, at least where I am. But also, that's not what I want to be doing, and that's also not what the Sharks want me to be doing. Like, and I'm not saying I don't want to be following the CUDA because I follow the CUDA anyway. But the CUDA's the feeder team. I want to be watching the club. Sharks want me to be there. They want butts in seats. I mean, they're doing everything right now to get people in. Like the resale value on tickets is like sub $20 for a lot of games now.
Yeah.
Which is about where it should be, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, the product is
quality of play that
terrible.
we're getting. Yeah, but like, the Sharks shouldn't be driving me to the AHL to get my fix of Sharks hockey.
Well, you're right, but we're in they put themselves in a terrible quandary, right? Like
they did, yeah.
that, as we talked about last week, the quandary is that this is a fragile team. Maybe they're getting over that or not. I don't know. The last two games have been at least possibly encouraging. The third period against the Rangers, and then they played fine. They could, they totally could have tied it up and gotten a point.
Against the Devils?
Against the Devils, which is, by the way, a great team. So, even only losing 2-1 to them it's not the worst thing in the world, and it's going to happen to a lot of teams. but the underlying issues are so very clear, right? This is a team that just gives up shots. So they're trying to play defensively. They're trying to keep shots to the outside. They're not particularly competent at it because their defenders are all bad, with the possible exception, of Vlasic has been fine, Shemek has been fine, um, but and of course, obviously Carlson is great, but he's not there to play defense. Um, he's there to pass the puck out of the zone, get it into the offensive zone, and keep it in the offensive zone, and pass around there, etc. Right?
Yeah.
So that is not a recipe for success. Getting outshot, by getting your shot figure doubled by your opponent in every game is not going to lead to very many wins. And
No.
even against the Rangers, that's where they were until the third period, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
even for the goaltenders too. Again,
yeah,
right? Like
yeah,
Reimer and Cock can play the best they can play, but the reality is, the more shots taken against them, the higher the odds that one is going to go in.
yeah,
And a lot of, and also, a lot of the Sharks are giving up a lot of fast breaks right now.
yeah,
And in those fast breaks, they're not playing defense
yeah,
particularly well either. And so, they've got to find a way to limit that.
yeah.
And I know it sounds obvious,
So
but if they could just figure out how to suppress the shooting from the other team,
yeah,
I'm not saying they magically become good, but Sturm said it in his interview. Again, he said, we're not a team that's going to score a lot of goals, which isn't great when the team knows that, but I guess they're being honest.
hashtag one or fewer, baby.
Yeah. Yeah, basically like one, maybe two, right?
Yeah.
So, if you're going to allow the other team to walk in and shoot 45 times against you,
Right. Well,
and you're only going to shoot 13 times, you're not going to win those games.
No, and look, one of the foundational precepts of hockey analytics, as it is called, is that shot volume is a predictor. Consistent shot volume is a predictor of success or failure in this league, right? Like, if you consistently generate shot attempts, if as a team over, through a season, that is predictive of success, right? If you give up a huge volume of shot attempts, that is predictive of failure, right? That means that you're
Right.
going to lose more often than you're going to win. And then, of course, in the realm of reality, then luck plays a huge role, right? Which is why the Sharks didn't lose 5-1 last night when they really could have, right? Like, it's a combination of luck and good play by Kakinen ended up with 2-1 loss instead of a 5-1 loss. That's the difference. Bounces, good goalie play is causes huge swings in this league. So this is a team that right now is built to lose, and there's no solutions.
Yeah, they really aren't.
Because at the NHL level, you don't. I mean, there's certainly levers to be pulled to make the Sharks somewhat more offensively successful, like playing Noah Gregor instead of fucking Matt Nieto, or any number of fourth liners. But Quinn's not going to do that because he doesn't trust Gregor defensively, which is the great paradox of this, right? Like, the idea that quote unquote defensive players lead to winning hockey is absolutely false because you need to generate shot volume.
Right. Yeah.
If those guys can actually suppress shots, which they're not, then you can make an argument that the defensive players matter. But there's no evidence of that among all of these quote unquote defensive players that Quinn is playing, right? And so there's no solution with the current group. But they also probably don't want to bring Eklund, Bordeleau, Gushchin, whoever up into this mess. Right? You said we could look forward to the day that they're like, let's bring up an entire line of CUDA, and that's unrealistic because of salary cap issues and waiver wire stuff too, unless they
of course
choose to expose some players that honestly no one should be sad if they got picked up by other teams. But I don't think they want to do it. I think they want to shield. It's so weird, right? Like, I can't
So
understand
can I
the
throw a conspiracy theory with that?
yeah, but let me just finish the thought,
Yeah,
and then
yeah,
yes,
go ahead.
please. Like I can't figure out the mental gymnastics you have to go through to be like, we must shield, the young guys from, the what's going on the big team, but the big team is also a team we've assembled to make the playoffs. Like I just it
Well,
feels
they're
like that
either
requires somebody's brain to literally be split in half to hold those two thoughts at the same time.
they're either confused or they're not being entirely truthful.
Yeah.
And I would suggest it's probably the latter. And one of the hints to that, I think, was in the interview. There was a couple of interviews with Quinn, obviously, right before the Rangers, that being his former team, where he was sort of asked about his time there and the firing, what went wrong, and that kind of stuff. And one of the things that he said that was interesting. It's not like you don't know this stuff, but you just don't hear people voice it. Was when he was brought in, he was told that year 4 was the year. Now he didn't make it to year 4, partially because of what COVID did to that season and a bunch of other reasons as well, because that team was on an upward trajectory right before that point. But that little insight tells you that obviously GMs will have a multi-year plan, as they should, right? So
Hmm.
the whole we're trying to get back we're trying to be competitive. I think the Sharks genuinely do want to be more competitive. I don't think they're intentionally tanking. I think that they know that they are not in a position to make this team really be good until year 3, essentially, when a lot of these contracts come off the books and you're able to potentially do more with the roster. They don't want to say that out loud because, tickets have been crap for a while and they got to sell tickets. Like at the end of the day, you can sit there and say tank, 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 tank. But this is also a business,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
There's a lot of jobs that are on the line. I have friends who have worked in the organization. I know people who work in the organization. Now, when your team is losing, it is not good for anyone. It is not good for the players. It is not good for the coaching staff. It is not good for the head of marketing. It is not good for the salespeople. It's not good for anyone. So as fun as it is to kind of make that out as like, oh, well, no, it's just a forest for trees thing. At the end of the day, you still got the year-to-year business. So I don't think they're going to sit there and tell people, yo, there's not a whole lot we can do for 2 years. So just deal.
But
Also, I think, and this is where my maybe slight conspiracy theory comes in. And I don't know that I buy this. I'm just going to throw it out there as something that maybe people haven't thought about. But the Sharks. So look at where the Sharks are right now with Timo Meier. Okay, or let's talk about Timo Meier before the season started. This is a guy who, if you were the Sharks, you would like to extend, but he was going to be extremely expensive to do so. Now, both sides have opted to see how this season goes. That may not work out in Meier's favor, depending on whether or not he can start scoring and prove that last year wasn't the fluke; it was more a return back to form. And the Sharks, to an extent, are also looking at it from that perspective because what he would have commanded had they tried to sign an extension before probably would have been too much for them to be able to reasonably afford it and help themselves get out of stuff. So there's a small part of me that wonders, especially after this many games, when it's very clear that these Sharks, this combination of players is not right. It's not going to get much better than this. And the Sharks are not in the position to really make trades to make it better. And there's no one for them to really sign to make it better. No, it's not Jumbo, folks. He's not suddenly going to come up and the team is good. There's a small part of me that wonders whether or not keeping Eklund and Bordeleau down is a combination of 3 things. One, trying to keep them in an area where there's a winning culture versus the mental suckfest that is the main club now. And we can debate whether or not that's good for them, but they would feel that way. But just, the CUDA right now look like a team that's going to have that winning culture. It's early in the season, but they just seem to have that pop, right? The Sharks definitely do not.
I mean, yes. Oh, hold on.
No,
They have that
hold
pop.
on.
They have that pop because they have NHL level players playing down there.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's totally fine, but that doesn't change it doesn't change that point, right? But this is a combination of things, right? So that's sliver 1 there. Sliver 2 would be they do genuinely want to have the next team developing together to an extent. Now, I don't believe that that's how the AHL really works, and they haven't used the AHL that way in the past. So only time will tell whether or not they're actually going to be developing things into the system and it's the right system to do it in, and whether or not the AHL is the right level of competition to do that in. But if they're not yanking guys up and down, then at least it does give that a little bit more stability than, if they are yanking up and down, because then you don't get that stability at all and you can't really do that very well. But the third, and this is the part I don't think, people are really talking a lot about, is the third is the contracts, right? So there aren't really contract restrictions right now for Bordeleau or Eklund, right? Bordelow's already, his contract already started, right? Last season when they brought him up. But, and again, this is a long shot, Ben, but just hear me out. I don't know. I don't know that I think the Sharks are doing this, but it could be. You take those two other factors and you combine them with the fact that the Sharks are trying to get to a point where they have enough salary coming off the books to put together a competitive roster again. That may prove to be a little more challenging if they bring those guys up now. They are studs and the rest of the team is shit. Because come time for, RFA, which will, be soonish on that timeline, you may have made those guys more expensive than you want them. Now, I'm not justifying that as you should do it that way. But I wonder if that thought is in there to an extent of, hey, there's no reason to, we have a situation where we're going to have a winning culture in the AHL, which will be better for them mentally. We have a situation where we're going to try to keep those guys developing together so that when we do pull them up, they're more ready to go than if we're pulling them up individually and hoping that things stick. And then 3, by doing that, it puts us in an advantageous position come RFA negotiation time. That starts to make a little more sense to me, because otherwise there's nothing about the NHL roster right now that suggests that things are going to get are even going to, stabilize all that much to a product that is going to translate to sales of anything, right? Again, this is a business. They got to get butts and seats. This team is not going to be able to compete for the playoffs. I question whether or not this team's even going to be able to be picked apart for spare parts come playoff time, because the way that they're playing right now, it's, again, we talked about this last week where some people were like, oh no, like they bought low and they're going to sell high. And the players have to play well enough, because those contracts are, again, not particularly low contracts for the people they picked up. So, and they've got to be able to prove value before anyone's going to pick them up as an extra depth player. And the Sharks right now do not look like a team that has any of that to offer. Any playoff team, not better than someone somewhere else. So I don't know. Again, that's not really my personal conspiracy theory, but I think when you look at that as a combo, then it starts to maybe justify the decision not to bring those guys up. Again, now I wouldn't do it. I would just say, look, screw this. Let's bring like Bordeleau and Eklund right now immediately, and then let's keep eyes on Coe. Let's keep eyes on Gushchin. Let's keep eyes on Merkley. And try to do it that way, because that's going to be more entertaining for the fans. But I don't necessarily,
that's the key, though, right?
Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing. Sorry, one more thing to point out is, when you brought up a good point about, if they want to expose people on waivers. So, and no one's going to take them with those contracts. True. Also, when you pop those players down, they're not, unless they're on 2-way contracts, they didn't suddenly get cheaper for you. Whereas they have a number of players who are on 2-way contracts that are cheaper if they're in the AHL. So I don't know. I think all these are probably factors into some of that decision making, because otherwise, what this October has shown us is that these players are not going to get it done.
Yeah,
they're just not.
Well, I mean, so that's the problem with assuming that we're being lied to just to get butts and seats is. That doesn't work. What gets butts and seats in the Bay Area is winning.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And if you're not winning, there's people aren't coming. Now maybe that's also an argument that we think that maybe you'll get some butts and seats if you put the exciting guys on the ice like Bordeleau and Eklund and Merkley, and maybe that's also not a winner in the Bay Area, right?
Right.
To actually get butts and seats, but I
But here's the distinction, though, Ben. Here's the distinction. I agree with you. First of all, the Sharks fandom is great, right? You typically aren't a casual hockey fan in California. You're either a hockey fan for the most part, or you're not a hockey fan, right? And so the Sharks fan base, considering the Bay Area size, the Sharks fan base is not that large comparatively speaking, not compared to the Warriors or the Giants or the other teams. And it's fine. It's not really a hockey market. So I think the Sharks fans, I agree with you, are savvy enough to see through this. Most of them. But I do think there is a difference between saying, hey guys, we're gonna blow chunks for 3 years. That's not
but
gonna
you
be
don't
better.
have you didn't have to say that. That's my point is like
No, you
you
didn't.
could
But I
have a
think but
completely different marketing plan
I think
of
I think they're yeah. Listen, I know where you're going with this, and I agree. But I think from their perspective, I think fans are fatigued from going 3 years of not making the playoffs. I don't think fans are naive, but I think what the Sharks maybe were hoping for was to be able to capitalize on that little bit of hope that things may start to change. And by saying, hey, we want to be more competitive. Note they've never said we're going to make the playoffs. They've just said we're going to be more competitive than like last year, which is should have been a low bar. Although I would argue they're certainly not doing that. That's even just that little thing is more encouraging than being completely transparent. But I agree. You didn't have to say anything at all. But they're trying to get butts in seats, right? So at the end of the day, saying we're gonna try to play more competitive hockey. Not saying how competitive we're gonna be. We're just gonna try to play more competitive hockey is encouraging enough for some fans to go, all right, I'll come in and check this out for a while. Now, here's the hard thing with hockey, and this actually taps into. I was gonna point this out when you were talking about defensive hockey too. It's a long hockey season, so like that ploy is only going to work so long. And same with defensive hockey. You can play defensive hockey. There's a lot of games in hockey. So at some point you got to get offense going, right? Both these. It's not as endurance-ish as baseball per se, but you do have to be strong for a long period of time. So I don't know. If you look at the packages that they've been rolling out, Ben, I know you've since moved out of the Bay Area. But they have all sorts of subscription and block plans, and it's very clear that they're hoping they rope you in with one so that you're going to a couple of games as part of that plan. So I think that's where it is. Maybe dishonesty was the wrong word. Maybe it was more wishful thinking. But as fun as it is, I think for a lot of fans to sit around and go, tank for Bedard and all that kind of stuff. The organization's not going to say that. That wouldn't
well,
be that
no.
wouldn't be good.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know what you do if you're in the Sharks' position in terms of getting butts in the seat, but we
Write it
know
off.
we know that the thing that gets butts in seats is winning, and they've
Yeah.
constructed a team that is not going to win, right? So
Right.
that
Right.
ultimately is on the GM and the
No, I
coach,
agree.
right?
I
Like,
totally agree.
and it's certainly also with the team being this bad, uh, suggests that they've chosen the wrong path for like
Yeah,
getting better, right? Like so
I agree.
they can be held accountable for those things, right? They should
Yeah.
be held accountable for those things. Whether it's
Right.
some deep conspiracy theory plan, to be better in 2 or 3 years, um, the
I don't think
reality.
that's a conspiracy theory, by the way. I think that's the reality of the contracts that they have.
But again, okay, so again, they made that
Oh yeah, 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 yeah,
situation,
yeah. Yeah.
right? Fuck that. I'm not saying this to you. It's not an excuse because you cleared cap space with Burns and then you completely filled
You
that cap
filled it
space
up.
back up
Yeah.
with garbage players. So,
And you didn't buy out Vlasic when you had that second opportunity to buy out Vlasic.
yeah, or the first time around, which you could have
Yeah.
done it
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
too. Now, granted, I think Vlasic has been playing okay, but he's not, part of a playoff team at this stage of his career, right? Like,
Right.
so I do, as you say, I don't think they're going to be able to move any of these parts that are bad parts, that they brought in at
Not
the
without eating salary, which I don't want to do either.
yeah. The only thing, again, I can think at this point is you embrace the reality of the fact that this team is very, very, very bad at some point, and start to work on guys like Couture and Carlson. Wouldn't you like to, go someplace where you have a chance to win, perhaps, at the trade deadline? Because this team isn't going anywhere, and you don't need them. You don't, they're neither of them is good enough to make this a winning team right now, and and those are the sorts of guys that when things are bad, also don't really contribute in the locker room,
Yeah.
which is a terrible thing to have to say about your captain, but they never should have made Couture captain, which
Yeah,
we talked about.
and that's I felt that way too. I felt that way for a while, and I especially right now feel like he's not the right choice to be captain at all. Like this season, I think really, my mind wasn't already cemented on that, it is now. Hey, we had some games, so let's talk about these real quick here, Ben. Our week started with the San Jose Sharks playing the Islanders. Now again, they would open up the scoring, familiar thing, right? With Nico Sturm in the first period. And then they had a second period meltdown. Now, they did get a second goal from Svechnikov in there, but they gave up 3 goals, and 2 of those in pretty relatively short order. They would end up losing this game 5-2. It wasn't particularly encouraging. I don't have any immediate thoughts on this game whatsoever, other than Nico Sturm, again, venting his sort of frustration openly and honestly, which I appreciated. What about you? Anything?
Again, I think we've already talked about this. The main thing, that second period vulnerability the Sharks have that, the team itself is frustrated about, is just what happens when you've got a bunch of old, slow players and a long change. And it's not really that hard to figure out, but
What I saw. So someone asked me about that. I can't remember who it was. Otherwise, I'd give them a shout out. But they asked me, why I thought that was happening. And one of the things that I pointed out was when you're playing hockey, well, any sport really, you have a game plan obviously that you're going in with, but the first period is a lot of feeling each other out, especially this early in the season when you haven't faced each other yet and these are new rosters. By the second period, you should hopefully have an idea of what you need to do to beat that team based off of how they're playing and make adjustments. And I think maybe part of the reason that the Sharks seem to have pretty competent first periods and then not so good second periods is partially because other teams are understanding what the Sharks are bringing and making adjustments. And the Sharks are it's not necessarily the Sharks are getting worse as much as they're staying flat. And the other team is now going, okay,
well,
okay.
I think there's an even simpler explanation to it with, the fact of the way the Sharks play, which is that when you are buried in your own zone and you're on the long change, it is even harder to get your rotation on and off the ice, right?
Right.
So it is much more likely that a defenseman and a forward, if not multiple folks, get stuck even when you clear the zone. And so you've got tired guys on the ice, and a younger, faster team does not find themselves in that position, right? Which is our opponents. Yeah. And so they're, when you're tired, you're much more likely to make a mistake. You're much more likely to just get turned into a pylon, right? So that stuff adds up, and this team is not built to sort of survive it.
You got to be built for more than one period, though.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, if that is always going to be your second every single time, yeah.
Well, but that's the team they've built, right? These guys are not particularly fast. They're not good, and so they get pinned in their own zone. And then they're not necessarily, responsible when they get power plays in the second period, which is really a thing that I think particularly in that game killed them. No, I guess that was the Chicago game more so, but yeah, it's just, I mean, probably a combination of a bunch of stuff, but being old and slow and constantly being trapped in your own zone is a nightmare with the long change.
Yeah, and a nightmare for the goaltenders as well. Well, hey, let's go to the one positive game this week, right? Quinn got his first win as Sharks coach against his old team, the Rangers. Boy, he was annoyed being asked about that every 5 seconds. Coach Sherwood score in the first. But again, the Sharks didn't really get a lot of shots there. They were getting outshot, I believe. I have to go back and double check the box score, but I think they were. In the second period, it didn't feel like a full meltdown here, just because of the space apart between the goals. But the Rangers would score the next two goals, and you started to feel like, oh, well, here we go. In fact, I think I actually wrote that on our Discord thread. And then Shemek would score. Fun fact, after the game, I was listening to the interviews. I was just listening because my kids wanted to play a board game. And I heard talking, and I was like, whoa, how did they get Hurdle to slow down his speech? Because he's usually so, excited, and so, he speaks so fast. And it was Shemek, and I guess I never realized, obviously being from the same country, but like I never realized how similarly they sound. Shemek just sounded like a Hurdle, if Hurdle would slow down to think before he started speaking. It was just kind of a funny thing that I noticed. But then the Sharks would have a really great third period, completely out shooting the Rangers. I think it was like 16-2 or something like that. I mean, it looked like they were going to score at any moment. Now they didn't, and the game went into overtime. And that is when Erik Karlsson showed that flash of brilliance, right? He single-handedly set up a play under a lot of duress, and then was on the receiving end of the result and scored. And, again, that's the Karlsson that the Sharks traded for and signed, and obviously I think it helps. I think, it was what Hurdle, him, and Meyer was that combination. I know Meyer for the pass back, but like, that's an example to your point, Ben, of like, well, those are two guys who can pass and receive whatever Karlsson's doing and read him. And the end result was a beautiful play, and that gave the Sharks the win.
And credit to David Quinn for not pulling a Boofner and putting fucking Nieto out in the OT.
Yeah, I agree. Well, the Sharks, any other thoughts on this game?
Yeah, so the only other thing I was going to say is we're really seeing, particularly with Shemek, man, that guy really is constantly playing up in the offensive zone. And here, it turned into a goal, which is, not a bad thing. Right. But not something I think you necessarily want your defenders to be doing all the time. And maybe,
I don't know. Modern NHL seems to rate defensemen based off of how many goals and assists they're getting.
Well, not really kind of the larger point I was trying to make, but you're right. I guess what I'm saying is that also is what is leading to, in a lot of other cases, 2-on-1s, etc. Now, I think one of the things the Sharks are doing a little bit better in regards to the defensemen, moving up in the zone as much as they have been, is putting that forward, or the responsible forward being back more often over the last couple games than they were prior. But something to keep an eye on is that the defensemen are often pinching in ways that you may not really want them to do, but
especially if they're not fast.
A forward is being asked to cover for them, and keep an eye out to see if the forwards are effectively doing that, because they weren't in the first 4 games.
Well, and even if they are, you have to ask yourself whether or not the defensemen you have are capable of scoring more than the forward is, right? So when we had Burns and Karlsson, you could do that. I mean, the Sharks were doing it well, but you could do that because you knew Burns had a shot. You knew Karlsson had a shot. If you watch the Sharks now, who on that defensive line has the shot? Karlsson.
Yep.
And then I'm drawing a blank until we get Merkley up there, right? So you're basically trading. I mean, again, our forwards can't seem to score either, so I guess fair's fair. But in theory, you're trading an offensive player who could score for a defensive player who is maybe less skill-wise suited to
see, but that's the brilliance of this team, because you're not.
All things being even, literally, you are correct.
I mean, if your choice is Svechnikov or Shemek in that spot, you're actually weeping already. So
yeah, right. All right, well, the Sharks would play one more game this week. They do play today, but we're podcasting a little early today, so we're going to miss that game. We'll count it for the next week. But they played the New Jersey Devils on their tour of the Yorkies. Sharks lose this game 2-1. I didn't think this was the worst game by any means. The one thing I want to highlight here is the one goal, which was in the second period by Kevin LeBanc. That was a laser beam.
Yeah.
Like, that was a hell of a shot. So thumbs up to him on that. But again, the Sharks come away this week with one win. I guess I would say, and again, this is my opinion, feel free to disagree, Ben, that I was hoping for more after that Ranger game, more pop than I saw in the Devils game, but I also didn't think they played a terrible game in the Devils. Not as bad as they've been playing. So I guess that's kind of upward trajectory. Maybe, a step forward and a half step back there.
I think to that, all I would say is if Koch hadn't played as good a game as he did, we'd be talking about this on the same level as the Islanders game, because this game fair. Probably should have been 4-1, not 2-1. So I don't know.
That's fair.
Again, the indicator here is that the Sharks' shot totals were essentially doubled by New Jersey at almost every point. There was a moment where the Sharks got some energy in the middle of the second period where they got a flurry of shots and made it look like they were going to maybe be competitive, but then that flurry, didn't sustain. And so, if you're giving up 40 shots and only getting 18 or 19 or 20 or whatever, you're going to lose more games than you're going to win. Granted that is exactly what the Devils do to you, is pile up shots and suppress shots. So, I think the Sharks were lucky to be in this game more than they were good. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not claiming they were good. It felt nice to see a game that was 2-1.
Sure.
If I got to reach to anything. Well, all right, Ben. 3 stars of the week. I know you're dreading. I'm going to go first.
All right.
I'm going to go first to make it easy. My 3rd star is going to be the 4th line. And you might say, which one? Yes. My 2nd star, I'm going to give to Quinn only because if you're going to beat one team, it's nice to beat the team that fired you. So I'm going to give him that. And then I'm going to give my 1st star to Karlsson, mainly just for that heroic effort in overtime. He also had a really good third period as well. He had a good game in general, I think.
Yeah.
That Rangers game. But those are my 3 stars. What about you?
Phew. All right. So my 3rd star is going to go to LeBanc for scoring at home, his real home. Especially after being benched the game before. So that was great. My 2nd star is going to go to Big Cac for just the amazing game he had yesterday. And my 1st star is going to go to Erik Karlsson because he's Erik Karlsson. He's Erik fucking Karlsson.
Yeah.
And all that implies, including, getting caught going up ice when he probably shouldn't because he assumes that he has competent D partners, etc. And sadly, he doesn't.
Poor guy. Maybe this is the season that convinces him he doesn't want to be here.
Yeah.
But the Sharks, where are they right now? Odds of this podcast, they are last in the Western Conference. So those of you on the tank train, you should be happy. Their goal differential is pretty bad too. Obviously, it's like a -11. They're 1-6-0, folks. In fact, here's the thing I didn't touch on, Ben. I didn't think they were going to beat the Rangers. And I felt ashamed to be rooting for an overtime loss at the beginning of the game. And that is now how I'm rooting for the Sharks. Just get to overtime.
Why? Why do you want them to get?
I know. Because I don't believe they're going to win the fucking lottery. That's why, Ben.
No, they probably won't. But what else do we have to look forward to, Alex?
Because if they get to overtime, and I know you're going to poke holes in this immediately, and I see the holes, I'm going to say it anyway. That at least tells me that they're playing a competent game. But it could just be Reimer and Kakkonen. So who knows at the end of the day. So yeah, Sharks, bad. If you look at the Pacific Division right now, which I just clicked over to, so the Sharks are sitting there. They've got 2 points after 7 games. Yikes. Terrible start. Easily their worst start. Tied with them is Vancouver, who's played 1 less game. And then with 3 points above that, having only played 5 games, is the Anaheim Ducks. And then you got Edmonton, who have 4 points, who have also only played 5 games. The Sharks have already dug a pretty substantial hole. They have games this week. They have a game, as mentioned today, at Philadelphia against the Flyers at 4 o'clock, depending on your time zone. Sorry, Colin, doesn't refer to you. And then they play Vegas at home on the 25th, which is Tuesday. Thursday, they play Toronto. And then Sunday, I'll be at this game. They've got an early day game at 1:30 against the Tampa Bay Lightning, which my wife thought was a hot ticket when she bought it, and didn't, was hoping the Sharks would be a little more competitive, and now realizes that this will be a fun game to watch the Lightning play. But that concludes our week. Again, Sharks not looking good. It is entirely possible that they get through this October having only won one game in an overtime and sort of fluky. So those of you on the tank patrol, I guess I salute you. I hope that works out for you. But otherwise, for those of us who are hoping for good Sharks hockey, World Cup is in November. Plenty of other things to watch. That's what I would say. All right, Ben, say bye-bye.
Hashtag one or fewer.
Bye. Hey, thanks for adjusting the time, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I got nothing going on. My kids are out of the house. So.
I know this weekend we've been sick for 2 fucking weeks, dude. My kids have been out of school for 2 weeks. And it's not COVID. It's like all the schools here have had just outbreaks of stuff.
Yeah.
Like there's like RSV going around. There's RSV. I don't know. My wife keeps calling it RSVP, which is wrong. And then now I have it, and I'm just like, Jesus Christ! It's like a month of being sick. Sucks. But they have activities today. Or they're well enough to do their activities today.
Well, that's good.
So Luke's got it.
They can go make other kids sick. Yeah.
No, they're not.